Good morning, Eastern North Carolina, and welcome back to another episode of The Current. We are going to discuss some updates on Canine Chile and her death, as well as the reopening of Martin County Hospital, in addition to flock cameras, and what are we willing to exchange by way of privacy for safety. And at the end of the episode, we are going to argue about whether or not high school age students or teenagers should have part-time jobs. So there have been several updates via Facebook regarding the investigation of the death of Canine Officer Chile back in June. And to be completely honest, I am so incredibly disappointed in the way that the sheriff's office has handled this entire thing, and how seemingly any dispute regarding the sheriff's office turns into a sort of media frenzy. And the drama surrounding this situation and others, I think, really cheapens the gravity of what has taken place here. And I think that transparency can be accomplished without it becoming a spectacle. That is a fine line to walk. I think it takes some very specific tact in order to tread that line. But more and more, it feels less as if we care about the truth and more as if we care about the engagement and the shock value of what has taken place. I really am equally disappointed with some of the public response to media inquiries for the sheriff's office. There seems to be a scale of opinions regarding the sheriff's office, and specifically Paula Dance. It is no secret to anyone that lives in Pitt County that Paula Dance is a very polarizing figure, and there is a spectrum of opinions regarding her position. I think you have people on one extreme that take the position that they do not like this woman, whatever the reason may be, whether it's legitimate or illegitimate. They do not believe her to be qualified. They will take any and every opportunity that they have to potentially remove her from that position, and they don't care whether or not it's justified. Then you have people on the opposite side of the extreme that blindly follow the sheriff's office and what is being released and speak down towards anyone that questions what the sheriff's office may be doing and its legitimacy, and suggest that in questioning the sheriff's office, you must just have a personal vendetta against Paula Dance. Two extremes. I would like to believe that the vast majority of people fall somewhere in the middle, where I personally don't particularly care about Paula Dance as an individual. I care about the position that she holds, and I have respect for it. And all I want is for her in that position and her department to do their job and to do it well. Paula Dance is an elected official. She was elected by the overwhelming majority of voters that participated in the primary election, so she must be doing something right. However, she does hold a public office. She is an elected official, and every single resident of Pitt County has not only the ability to question the decisions that are made under her leadership, but the responsibility to do so. That is a very fair position to take, and those questions should be met with humility and professionalism. That is part of the gig when you sign up to be a public elected official. All of that being said, some of y'all are doing way too much, and those of you that are online suggesting that the deputy responsible for this should be locked in a hot car and effectively tortured for some period of time as by way of punishment, y'all are being crazy. Let's relax. Those of you that are online suggesting that the delay in releasing this information was a calculated and coordinated effort by the sheriff's office to avoid the possibility of a write-in candidate running against Paula Dance because there was some sort of timeline benefit for them, y'all are also being crazy. Not only are you wrong, because factually the dates do not match up. This story broke July 21st. The deadline for the write-in candidate was August 6th. It's 90 days before the general election. You're loud and wrong. Beyond that, who do you think is going to just up and run against her and all of a sudden put together an effective and coordinated campaign over the next 90 days. There is nobody available to do that. Not on either side of the aisle, not on the Democratic ticket, not on the Republican ticket. If there was someone who possessed the correct combination of charisma, likability, money, and credentials, they would have run against her in the primary. And as much as y'all like to believe that it's a credentials-only process, it very much is not. And there is no one else that has that select group of traits that could stand a chance at running against her and winning between now and November 6th, which is basically tomorrow. This whole thing is a prime example of what I said in one of the very first episodes when I talked about proactive, honest communication. The sheriff's office should have immediately released a statement regarding this incident. Hey, this is what happened. This is what we're doing. We're currently investigating. We will let you know when we know more. It should not take 30 days to complete an investigation about an event that took place over the course of several hours with very limited involved individuals. And if it does, that should highlight for you as the public how inefficient this process is. And I don't know where the inefficiency is coming from. I don't know if that's a systemic issue, that this is the way in which the sheriff's office is required to conduct the investigation. The inefficiency is coming from the top down, or if it's an internal problem. Is the sheriff's office just inefficient at conducting this investigation? Either way, it's a problem. Inefficient investigations are expensive investigations. For every day that goes by, there is more time and more money and more resources being put into this particular set of events that are not being diverted for other things. And it's costing the taxpayers money. So I personally have questions about why it would take 30 days to finalize this investigation. I have said before, you can have the world's best product. You can have the world's best leadership. And it does not mean a damn thing if you have piss poor marketing. And all PR, public relations, is marketing and marketing strategy. How to influence public perception, which is arguably just as, if not more important than the reality of what took place here. Because if the public perceives you as being anything less than truthful, the rest of it matters, but it's hard to get the truth to cut through what the general public already perceives. And Paula Dance should have known better than to sit on this information for any length of time, given how obviously and clearly polarizing her position is. Regardless of whether or not it's fair, regardless of whether or not it's justified, that really doesn't matter. All of the questions and all of the media requests and all of the information should have been met with humility and professionalism. These are fair questions to ask. I think the public is entitled to honest and transparent, proactive communication. And that is not what happened here. And what needs to happen moving forward is an acknowledgement of that failure, a rectification of it, and lets everybody move on with our lives. Speaking of moving on, last week we went and checked out a new business here in Greenville at the corner of Plaza Drive in Evans. Sugar Coated Bakery opened at the old Great Harvest bread location a few weeks ago, and we went and had some sweet treats the other week. So check out this little snippet from that visit. What up, fools? Sugar Coated Bakery opened at the corner of Evans Street and Plaza Drive. This is Josh's, but I'm gonna take a bite of it. That's like a cake style donut, but it's fresh. You can tell that it's fresh. Dunkin' Donuts, that stuff has been sitting there for 3 days. I'm fixing to learn y'all something about Martin County Health Hospital. For those of you that don't know, in August of 2023, Martin County Health filed for bankruptcy and closed the doors, effectively creating a desert of emergency services for approximately 22,000 people across Martin County. All of those residents were now being transported to Beaufort County Health, which is 22 miles away, for any emergency services because there was no emergency room in Martin County. Now, this particular facility closed for a couple of different reasons. The main two being, first and foremost, a shrinking population. Over the last 10 years, Martin County population, which is already incredibly rural, has decreased by almost 10%. And the second being an overwhelming majority of Martin County residents bypassing Martin County Health for specialized treatment and other sort of healthcare to other larger institutions. They're leaving Martin County and going to Chapel Hill or to Duke or to ECU Health for care. Emergency room deserts are becoming a bigger and bigger problem across the entire nation. But North Carolina has the second largest population of rural residents in the entire country. We are second only to Texas. And percentage-wise, we have a higher percentage of rural residents than Texas does. We have nearly 3.5 million people classified as rural residents in the state of NC. So rural healthcare is going to continue to be a challenge for us specifically in North Carolina. Now, a couple of years ago, Congress implemented a designation called a rural emergency hospital that was then subsequently adopted by Medicaid. And there are very specific criteria of a rural emergency hospital. It has to have less than 50 beds, and they are only allowed to provide emergency and observational services. And in some instances, they can provide outpatient care, but there's a lot of exceptions and stipulations to that I'm not going to get into because I don't want to get in the weeds. But in general, a rural emergency hospital only provides emergent and observational care. In the budget that was just passed for North Carolina General Assembly, there was a $25 million allocation made towards the reopening of Martin County Health in conjunction with a $35 million budget that was earmarked through the NC CARES Act for reopening Martin County Health underneath the ECU Health umbrella. So altogether, this is a $220 million project for ECU Health to acquire Martin County Health, reopen that facility, and then to subsequently expand their inpatient ability in Beaufort County. So what will happen is if you go to Martin County for an emergency service, a patient would be stabilized and then transported to Beaufort County for any inpatient care. So if Martin County reopens under this rural emergency hospital, this will be the first time that a hospital is revived, brought back from being closed under this designation, which is a big deal, not just for the residents, but for ECU Health. It also comes with a lot of financial benefit for ECU Health because in bringing Martin County Health underneath the regional umbrella, this rural emergency hospital designation comes along with a lot of state and federal funds. It also helps fill the pipeline for the demand for inpatient beds in Pitt and Beaufort counties, which helps ECU Health leverage to obtain more funds to expand their current facilities. There's a lot of benefit to this because distributing cost between 3 locations creates a situation where you effectively internally subsidize the expense of some of the more rural facilities with the more populated and wealthier facility, which is fantastic to do within one institution and under the same umbrella because it helps offset cost and it allows resources for some of the more rural communities that wouldn't otherwise be there. But I also think it would be irresponsible and unfair to suggest that this setup does not come without risk because there certainly is. I find it interesting that I have yet to see a single person question whether or not ECU Health cornering the market and essentially creating a monopoly on healthcare across 3 counties, whether or not that's concerning. I'm not saying that it's problematic in and of itself. Again, it certainly has its benefits and there are a lot of pros to this situation, but there are also cons. And we just saw that play out with United Healthcare's contract ending with ECU Health and thousands of people now being out of network for basically the only healthcare provider in Pitt and Beaufort counties. Thankfully, that got resolved relatively quickly. I think the end of last week, they renewed the contract, and now United Healthcare is back in network with ECU Health. But you can see how, despite the fact that that was fixed pretty quickly, there is potential for benefits and disruption by allowing such a large institution to corner the market. Speaking of things that are beneficial, we're going to move on to our next segment of The Well, which is, what are you willing to exchange by way of your privacy for your safety? Flock cameras have made the headlines nationally and locally over the last couple of weeks in regard to their use by law enforcement and whether or not they fringe on some of our civil liberties. And the state of North Carolina is currently operating a pilot program for ALPRs, which is automated license plate readers. Flock camera is just a brand of an ALPR. There's actually 4 different brands in use right now across the state. Flock is one of those 4 vendors. And as a condition of this pilot program, the SBI has to present a research paper, for lack of a better word, a collection of data and information to the General Assembly every 6 months. And I actually reached out to SBI for a media inquiry to see if we could get an interview to talk about some of these things regarding the flock cameras. They were not able to accommodate an interview at this time, but they did send me a copy of this full report that was last given in April. The next report is due the beginning of October. And some other things to note about this program is that initially this was supposed to end July 1st of 2025. And it was extended to July 1st of 2026. They have requested an additional extension until 2028, July of 2028. So they are doing that because they want to continue to gather more data, and they also want to implement a statewide system that is categorizing this data that they're accumulating. So right now, each individual department has ALPRs, and each individual department has a database with the information that those ALPRs are collecting. What the state wants to do is to create a statewide database where across all the departments and across all the ALPR vendors, all of the information is housed in a centralized location and is accessible to any department across the state of North Carolina. Very early on in the report, there is a little line item that says that in 0 cases, the data collected by the ALPRs was found to have been stored after a period of 90 days. Well, the problem with that is that we don't believe you. I think that the state of North Carolina is not necessarily storing that information, but somebody somewhere on some server in some data center, that information is available. I said at the beginning of this episode that public perception is arguably just as, if not more important than the reality of a situation. And the reality is that the level of trust that the public has in the powers that be, specifically surrounding our data and whether or not it's being stored and analyzed and repackaged and sold off, is so incredibly small that I don't know that it would even matter if the truth was, no, that is not the case. We do not do that. This information is completely deleted, never to be seen or heard from or able to be accessed ever again after a period of 90 days by anybody anywhere on the face of the earth. Even if that was the case, I don't know that anybody would believe it. And for that reason, it doesn't really matter. Now, personally, I'm not willing to sacrifice my civil liberties for the illusion of safety. And let's be clear, that is what this is. This is the illusion of safety, not actual safety. However, I find it very ironic, the public outrage that seems to follow any sort of government institution and their attempts to collect data for reasons of safety, while simultaneously doing everything they can, allegedly, to assure and prove to the public that this is not being misused or mishandled or, sold off inappropriately in any way. But there is such a lack of outrage when private equity and corporations tell you that they are collecting, mining, repackaging, selling your data. And we all willingly participate in it. Very few people seem to take issue with the fact that you're carrying around a device that has facial recognition technology stored in it, your fingerprint, your bank account information. We allow microphones into our house in the form of Alexa, and we plug them in and leave them there to listen and collect all sorts of information that we then sell off to other corporations so that they can use it to analyze consumer behavior and consumer data, and then use that information to repackage other crap and sell it back to us. We all willingly participate in that. And I'm calling myself out here as well, because I also have a phone with facial recognition technology and fingerprints and my bank account information in it. I have an Alexa. I use all of those same things. I even bought Meta glasses. I have some of those. Why is it that we have so little problem willingly participating in those things that are arguably egregiously more intrusive than these ALPRs, but we are vehemently against the ALPRs? Again, I'm not saying that we should be for the ALPRs, these slot cameras. I'm not making an argument for that. I am simply highlighting the irony of the situation. If you have never watched Enemy of the State, you should go watch it. I just watched it for the first time a couple weeks ago. It's got Will Smith in it. It came out in 1998, and it was a phenomenal movie. The premise of the movie is that the NSA is using a bunch of technology to track this guy all throughout the country. They're using facial recognition technology. They're using AI to pull his voice through the phone lines, satellites to track his movements, all kinds of crazy stuff that at the time would have been like just incomprehensible in 1998 that these technologies exist. All of that stuff is very normal right now today. So just keep that in mind when you're imagining what the next 30 years might look like. Things that seem incomprehensible to us today, not only are they already being thought of and produced, they probably are already in implementation. Let's be serious. What was also incomprehensible in the 90s was this idea that high school aged kids should not have jobs, which brings us to our next segment, Let's Argue. So I posted on Facebook a couple of days ago asking on opinions on whether or not high school age students should have jobs, and I don't think I got really a single person that said no, absolutely under no circumstances they should not have jobs, which makes me wonder whether or not my data set is very skewed. I see a lot of discourse online about the challenge of high school age students to obtain jobs. Should they work? Are they busy enough? When should we require them to, become and act like adults, et cetera, et cetera? A good friend of mine pointed out to me recently that some of the argument that runs parallel to this is this idea that teenagers have nothing to do, specifically in the city of Greenville, where the city is looking to implement a more permanent curfew for teenagers downtown. And this narrative that part of the reason that teenagers get in trouble is because there is nothing to do. I've never necessarily understood that. I mean, yes, like in theory, to some extent, idle hands and things like that. But also, if you're bored, find something to do. That was always what was told to me as a child. Find something productive to do. More specifically, I think having a job is a great way to fill some of your spare time. It teaches work ethic. It teaches time management. It teaches you to be responsible to and for someone that is not a parent. There's all kinds of life experience that is damn near impossible to be taught in any other setting other than a work environment. I am an advocate specifically for people having to go into hospitality and for experiencing the public in a restaurant setting. I think it's a very unique experience and one that everybody should have. I understand that some teenagers or high school students obviously are student athletes. They do volunteer hours. They're involved in sort of other things, churches, camps, things that occupy their time, and that's great. And I'm not necessarily advocating that those things should be sacrificed in exchange for a part-time job. But if you're bored, go get a part-time job. I promise you can find one. There are lots of small businesses that are constantly looking for good, reliable help that is relatively intelligent. They show up on time, they present well, they can follow instruction, and they hopefully can do a little bit of forward thinking. That would be like slam dunk employee if we can find someone that fits that criteria. Jobs for high school students, I think, are a must. I was working at 14 with special permission from the state with the worker's permit, doing things like working the concession stand at the ball field. I worked at New River Pottery for a season 1 year. I worked at Highway 55 as a server. I was doing all kinds of stuff. I was making my own money, and the sense of independence that it gave me was unmatched. And I had a lot of autonomy in that scenario, and I felt very in control of myself, as in control as you can feel at 15 or 16 years old. And I think that is of massive benefit to teenagers, especially this day and age when independence is delayed further and further, pushed further and further kind of down the line for a lot of kids. That is all that I have today. If you have questions, comments, concerns, you can email me at emily@emilymcallister.com. Please make sure to like, subscribe, share this video with someone that you think might find it interesting. Follow us on social media and tune in 2 weeks from today for the next episode.